guys, what's going on? Big Scott, Bourbon Cars and Cigars. It's a Wednesday, beautiful Wednesday, springtime. Chris, what's going on?
What's up, Big Scott? Good to be here with you, man.
For sure.
Good to be
My
here.
buddy Chris, longtime friend, from up north in Boston, now living in the Bourbon Trail. And so he's used to the clear liquors, right? Liquors.
You got it.
As most people would. You know, Chris, you were an adult in the 90s, so we all know what took over in the 90s, and I was just a young buck then. I actually didn't turn 21 till after 2000. So, the 90s were dominated by the clear liquors, so as long as I've known Chris, he's been certainly a vodka kind of guy,
Yep.
you know. He probably drank Zima, and who did?
I actually did. I liked it quite a bit. I can remember buying one. It was either an 8-pack or a 12-pack, and I looked forward to getting that.
Everybody
I loved it.
did.
Everybody did.
If you went to a party in the 90s, there was Zima, there was vodka, Goldschlager.
Yep. And the ladies used to pour like a red flute, like a red type of cherry flavor into it. That was what they did. Yeah.
And then Jolly Ranchers.
Yep. That too.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's the era he's from. I came right into the cusp and transition. Well, not really, because they say bourbon made its comeback around 2010 or so. I don't think so. Me living in Kentucky since 2000 from Texas, everyone always touted bourbon. So we're here, two different palates, and that's why I'm so happy to have you.
Yes, sir.
Because your palate, I'm pretty sure, is different. Most of the guys or friends I hang out with, we have similar palates, but when it comes to bourbon, everyone's palate is different when it comes to liquor in general.
Yep. And having been in Kentucky for about 15 years now, it's time I learned to acquire a taste for some fine bourbon. So I'm looking forward to this, guys.
Let's do it,
Yep.
for sure. So today's versus and review, if we're going to do two different bourbons, I consider it a versus. And this case, it's the Colonel E.H. Taylor. It is distilled at Buffalo Trace, bottled at Buffalo Trace. And then we have, out of Louisville, Kentucky, Prohibition style, Old Forrester 1920. I thought it would be a good matchup.
Yeah, looks good.
The bottles look similar.
They do. They do.
Old school bourbons. And remember, all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. So we're going to pour us some up, and then in the next video, next clip, next segment, we're going to talk about what we're tasting here. Let's go with the Colonel E.H. Taylor first, since it's already open.
Yeah.
All right, we're back. We both have us a pour of E.H. Taylor. So we're going to take the first sip. Usually we're going to swish it around in there. A lot of people, depending on where the bourbon sits, it's going to hit your tongue. It could be in your cheek. I call it cheeky. And of course, the Kentucky hug if it hits you right in the middle of the chest. So cheers, my man.
Cheers, brother.
E.H. Taylor.
That's
It'll
pretty
get
good
you.
one. It's
It's
a good
stout.
one. And it's strong. Yep.
You're reacting the right way for someone who's had it for the first time.
You got it. Yep.
E.H. Taylor, okay. Bottled in bond. So let's talk about that. We all know that, you know, prior to Prohibition, Bottled in Bond Act was because the middlemen back in the day selling bourbon used to basically step on it, much like drugs. So they would cut it with tobacco spit, which is pretty disgusting.
Wow.
And a whole bunch of other things. And so the Bottled in Bond Act basically protected the consumer. So that's why it says bottled in bond. And it was basically a very protected and thorough process of distilling the bourbon and bottling the bourbon.
Nice.
You know, so and then eventually the middlemen would be cut out, and everything would be in the bottle. So, what's your first?
You know, I actually smelled quite a bit of different aromas in there, and I'm not sure if it was. There was almost a citrus smell to me, a little bit.
Sure.
And when that Kentucky hug came, it went right down, but I could still smell that flavor, and it was almost a burnt citrus, is I think I would call that.
That's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, a lot of bourbons, because of the oak, are going to have a fruity smell and taste, right? And these are in oak barrels. And I agree with you. A little bit of a burnt, kind of fruity, like a cherry, obviously
Cherry.
vanilla.
I was thinking cherry, yeah,
Yep.
for sure.
E.H. Taylor is just a solid bourbon, in my opinion. It brings the Kentucky hug. The more you have it, though, the more tolerable you become, at least in my experience. Because when I first had it, it got me.
Yeah, that one got me pretty good.
But it's not one of those bourbons that when it hugs you, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
Agree. Once it was done, it was completely gone.
It was
which
good.
Which I like, yeah.
Smooth. It's a smooth bourbon. All right, man. Round 2 of sipping on this bad boy. Should have been a better little flow there.
Yes, that one didn't burn quite as much for a newbie here. That was a little easier to take.
Easier, easier to swallow.
Yes.
And that is what you could expect from E.H. Taylor. You may have had it yourself. If not, hopefully this video does you some justice. You know, it has this nice fancy canister. It comes in. So, you know, some people get that, I don't know if I want to open it kind of thing. And if you get it retail, it's not too expensive. But it's not at every liquor store, especially here in the Bourbon Trail. Fortunately, I live pretty close to Buffalo Trace. And I tend to be able to sneak up there and grab me a couple bottles. So that being said, I recommend E.H. Taylor. But up next, we're going to talk about and have a sip Old Forrester 1920 Prohibition Style. Back, Old Forrester Prohibition Style 1920 Prohibition Style. Remember, this is probably how it would have looked. I'm pretty sure the bottles changed, but remember, you know, they're one of the few companies. As a matter of fact, during the Prohibition time, you had to be licensed or permitted by the state and, well, probably the United States, because you remember all bourbon had pretty much came from Kentucky at the time. So it says here on the bottle, in 1920 during Prohibition, Owsley Brown was granted a limited permit to bottle medicinal whiskey at 117 West Main Street on Louisville Whiskey Row. Which brings me to another point. I have a bottle I found today, my good buddies at Jackson Wine and Spirit, of Whiskey Row Bourbon. So maybe next time I will do a versus with this versus that. Of course, there is a great fire, because now it's very regulated. When you house bourbon in barrels, the buildings have to be separated from each other. So, you know, lives were lost. Terrible accident, terrible fire. But Old Forrester, hopefully it lives up to that old school bourbon reputation. Let's take a whiff of it. What are you noticing so far, bottle to bottle, Chris?
What I see, interestingly enough, is that this one, for some reason, looks darker to me. Like it's harder to see through. It looks a little thicker, maybe.
Sure.
For an unstudied eye, it does look deeper and darker. I don't know if that's because of the age.
Sure.
Maybe.
And this one doesn't. It feels sweeter. Smells sweeter.
I
Yeah.
agree. More vanilla. This one for sure has a vanilla spice.
Like something you might want to pour into a cake.
Yep.
You know,
I agree.
spice it with.
Mm-hmm.
Well, man, cheers. Let's take our first sip. Ooh, this one got me a little hug.
That caught me a little bit.
Well, and remember, not that I'm Mr. Bourbon Meister, but I've had quite a bit more bourbon
Yeah,
than
I
you.
gotta tell you, I'm a rookie at the bourbon. I
That's
love
fine.
learning about this and taking
But
part in it.
interesting enough, that's how I reacted when I first had this.
Yeah, that one got me. My tongue afterwards felt that heat afterwards.
Yeah, so it sat on
After
your
here.
tongue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Then it came with the hug.
Yep. Nothing cheeky, but that was definitely here and then right on the tongue for sure. But the vanilla smell, I can still smell it.
Sure.
Which is kind of neat.
Sure. I'm going to take a sip of water because I don't think I did after the E.H. Taylor.
And the water does what now? It cleans up the...
Well, I mean, we're
palate.
just, cleaning our taste buds off, if you will, as best as it can. You know, at first sip, it's certainly strong. You know it's there, but it wasn't, you know, too overpowering.
No.
You know, I think the second sip's going to be really good because we had the water. I'm I'm looking forward to it. Let's do it.
Do it. Nice.
That hug was a little bit better for me.
That was. What I'm learning is it seems like the more you have, the less of the burn. I think as you get more accustomed to it,
Sure.
you get used to it a bit. That actually was very enjoyable. That was good.
It is.
Yeah.
Folks, at first, I thought about Whiskey Row. I really did think about opening the Whiskey Row versus this 1920 Old Forrester. I'm kind of glad I did the H. Taylor because there's a lot of similarities. We're going to talk about our final thoughts on this in our next segment, so we're going to let that sit a little bit. They are very similar. So, very rare, very hard to get, the H. Taylor. So, if you can get it, I highly recommend it. Would you?
For sure. Definitely would now.
But this is not as hard to get, and it's fairly cheaper. But it's not like a cut rate bourbon by any stretch of the imagination. As I've had my fair share. And for me, this hug's pretty darn good. I mean, it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Got a little fire.
Yeah.
And for me, I agree this is richer. So, as if I just wanted to sit back and sip the night away, I'm probably going to go with the H. Taylor. However, I think I have found a darn good bourbon to mix some stuff with.
Yes.
Maybe that's going to catch you off guard.
Yes.
Because that's my thoughts. If I'm going to do a breakfast bourbon, or which my lovely wife got us interested in so recently during a brunch, but if I'm going to maybe make an old-fashioned or a Manhattan, I'm probably going to go for this, and I'm probably going to just keep my E.H. Taylor for sipping purposes. Chris, what do you have?
I think that the biggest thing I would say is, from an inexperienced palate, is that had more of a cherry flavor, a fruit essence, and this definitely had a vanilla smell to me.
Very
distinctly different.
I actually agree with you. Good point.
And I like them both, but if I had to pick, with not having much experience, I think the vanilla one was a little bit more enjoyable. They were both very good, and I liked them both, but I think I would choose this if it was a blind test.
So,
Yeah.
what happens is, once we make our picks, we get to have a sip of that bourbon, and I picked the H. Taylor. So, I've had plenty of it. I still have plenty more. I'm probably going to enjoy a sip of the Old Forester again with Chris. I agree with you. I 100%, the H. Taylor is those dark aromatic cherries, maybe in a hint. I try when it's very dark and cherry flavorful. You got that oak going on. Mm-hmm. You might have a hint of some chocolate to a degree, for me. Yeah. Which I certainly tasted in the last verses on the 12-year cast strength Knob Creek. But this has got a very good, just, if I had to word it, Old Forester, old school, good old down south, bourbon, vanilla.
Yep.
You ain't feeling good, Sonny? We're going to let you have a sip of this tonight. What ails you? Kind of gimmick,
I think a sip of this with a little bit of ice would be literally just perfect for me.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you have it. So in this versus, this review, if you will, most people out there have had the H. Taylor, and most of you have either had this. But if you haven't, I recommend both.
I would do it. I agree.
And again, it's just proof that everyone's palate's different. Chris is going here. If I had to give up one, I'm going to stay with good old Colonel E.H. Taylor. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it's totally your choice. Hopefully our words of wisdom.
One thing I do know, I don't think I would say no to either one of them. I do say that.
Now, yeah. I thought maybe you already shared it, but was there some thought you had towards the H. Taylor I already forgot? I think you mentioned something about either the way it tasted or, when you first had it till today.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So learning about, bourbon and whiskey, I've been in Kentucky 15 years now. I thought it was a good time to start taking in the culture.
Sure.
And when I first started, I got to tell you, it was rough. Having not had it before, man, it burned. it was tough.
Okay.
And now after, I'd say, 4 experiences with it,
Sure.
this was actually enjoyable today. So I think that what I'm seeing is the more you experience it, maybe you become used to it and you can appreciate it a bit more.
So don't give up.
Right. I'm looking forward to doing more and seeing more of it.
Well, there you go. So sometimes, you know, I hear people say, I hate this Jack Daniels and all this. Hey, I get it, because there's probably, you know, I heard a woman say, that's the first time I got drunk and passed out. And, you know, I get it. Bad experience, right? But your first taste of bourbon, and my wife was very much the same way, that it took time for, and I mean, even if you're a novice drinker and now you're getting in the bourbon space, for sure, I have bad Jack Daniels experiences myself. So,
Right.
but now that I'm getting into the finer bourbons, if it doesn't sit right with your palate, give it another shot, because it's only going to get better.
For sure.
In addition to, people's palates are different. So, again, Chris would prefer this.
Yes.
The old Forrester. I prefer the H. Taylor. And bourbon is just an awesome thing. Tons of history behind it that we touched on either one. We look forward to sharing more with you. We look forward to having Chris on again as Bourbon Cards and Cigars continues to grow. There's going to be different types of segments, different types of interview things. But Chris, sure glad to have you. Any final thoughts? Or?
I'm just looking forward to you pouring me another one. That's what I'm looking for right now.
Well, we're going to do that. And until next time, folks, we'll see you on Bourbon Cards and Cigars.